As I mentioned earlier, Fred's son is going to share. I didn't have the honor and the privilege of knowing him personally, although I did meet him once. So I'd like to invite you up, Bob, to do that.
I have a cold, so I'm going to have to clear my throat here. Do you have some of my papers?
Maybe I stole some, I don't know.
That's copyrighted. Don't do that. There you go. It's 5. Thank you. No problem. Thank you all for coming to remember my dad, Fred Korbus. He lived a long and interesting life, and I'd like to try to summarize his 97 and a half years in about 10 minutes. He started out life in a poor family. As a child, his father worked as an apartment building handyman, and they lived in the basement. Not a basement apartment, they lived in the basement. He went to Blaine Grammar School, and in those childhood days before smartphones and video games, he collected stamps and coins and took an interest in shortwave radios. He told a story when, as a young man, he got on the streetcar which was taking everyone else out on their dates, while he was going home from his job as a coal shoveler, covered head to toe, including his face, in coal dust. You can imagine how that looked. He loved the outdoors. After graduating from Lakeview High School, he and a friend took the streetcar to the end of the line and then proceeded to hitchhike out west to see the country before returning to join the service. They split up during the trip, and before he came home, he worked as a Forest Service fire spotter in the Wenatchee National Forest up in Washington State, where he was stationed up by himself in a mountaintop cabin with rattlesnakes underneath it. He owned an Indian motorcycle and at least 2 Harleys during his life. One of his distinctions was a police officer told him that Dad had achieved the world speed record on Lakeshore Drive. He joined the Navy in 1942 and became a fighter pilot. As a cadet in Madison, Wisconsin, he went into the base's main office and, without permission, started playing music over the base's loudspeaker. A group of cadets reported to the office, grabbed him, and threw him in the lake. He spent 87 weeks in Corpus Christi, Texas, learning to fly for the Navy. He flew all the Navy's World War II planes, including Corsairs, Grumman F-4F Wildcats, Hellcats, and his favorite Bearcats. He also flew other aircraft used for training like Stearman biplanes. The war ended before he saw combat, but he did manage to take out some telephone lines by flying too low over the countryside on a training flight. The instructor seated behind him, plug your ears, Pastor, yelled at him through the microphone, "God damn it, Korbus, you're going to get us both kicked out of the Navy." Part of his flight training included qualifying for carrier landings. He flew out over the Atlantic Ocean to shoot landing the aircraft carrier Guadalcanal. With a single word, he described the emotion he felt when he first saw the carrier he had to land on sitting out in the middle of the ocean. Impossible. You could hear the terror in his voice when he told that rather brief story. He made 14 landings and 13 takeoffs, stayed on the carrier overnight, and then flew back to his base at Green Cove Springs, Florida. One time after the war, he just happened to be in the right place at the right time and was invited to have breakfast with a small group of people that included Mitsuo Fuchida, who was the Japanese pilot that led the attack on Pearl Harbor. He put himself through college while he was working and eventually got his engineering degree from the Illinois Institute of Technology. He joined the Naval Reserve and was recalled in 1953 during the Korean War. They sent him to San Diego to learn to fly the Navy's new jet fighters, Panthers, Cougars, and Sabres. His first child was born in San Diego on North Island Navy Base. Luckily, that war also ended before he saw any combat, and his small family moved to Colorado to enjoy the mountains. But they soon realized that they wanted to be near their families and moved back to Chicago about a year later, and I was born shortly after they got back. Let me get some water. I'm drying up. He loved the military. Being in the Navy was the most exciting time of his life. When he talked about it, you could see that he appreciated the formality, the honor, and the value of discipline. And he enjoyed the camaraderie that comes from working with other servicemen, working together with other servicemen toward a common goal. Even late in life, he joined the flying club at NAS Glenview, and I know there's several people in the room who have gone flying with him. And later, he joined the sailing club at Great Lakes Naval Station. At Great Lakes, he worked on the sailboats, sailed, and shared stories of military experiences with other veterans at the club. He took advantage of the Space A program the military offers that allows retired veterans to fly all over the world on military aircraft. He told one story where he was sitting in the cockpit of a big Navy plane, and someone came into the cockpit and offered the co-pilot some coffee. The co-pilot's response was, "No thanks, it keeps me awake." He loved the military, but he didn't love war. He was very sober when he talked about war, making it clear that it was a serious business not to be taken lightly. His main job later in life was working for the Army Corps of Engineers. He worked there for 23 years, starting in 1963, just a month after his third child, Wayne, was born. He was a licensed structural engineer. The division he was in at the Army Corps maintained all the government's locks and dams in the Midwest. He was a civilian employee with an Army general for a boss. When I was in high school, he and I flew out west in a Cessna 182 and stayed one night in Oklahoma City. The next morning when we took off, late in the takeoff roll, oil started spraying onto the airplane's windshield. By the time we realized it was a serious problem, it was too late to abort the takeoff. So, we radioed in an emergency and flew around the pattern, then lined up for an emergency landing with fire trucks standing by the runway, waiting for a disaster. By the time we were on final approach, the windshield was completely covered in oil, and I saw all his flight training kick in when he landed the plane with his head hanging out the side window. Later on that trip, when we flew over the Grand Canyon in that single-engine airplane, I knew I was in good hands. He was an active person. In high school, he was the captain of the swim team. That's your cue. Oh, okay. In high school, he was the captain of the swim team. He liked to swim, hike, fly, and sail. As a runner, he ran the Chicago Marathon. Now, those of you who lived in the neighborhood can remember how he would come out on the front porch on New Year's Eve and blast in the new year with his bugle. Well, I just happen to have that bugle here with me today. He bought this bugle as a kid in the 1930s for a nickel, and I think it's actually worth less now. But as a tribute, I'd like to blow the bugle one more time. And to recreate the experience accurately, I made a point of not practicing too much. Let me get some water here. We would always just... That was the best one I've done. Well, let me... You know what? I'm going to quit there because I think I saw Bill O'Reilly reaching for his handcuffs. So, our dad transferred his love of the outdoors to his children by making it a tradition to take us hiking in the forest preserves on New Year's Day. Where some people rejected technology, or at least ignored it, he embraced it. He had a computer until he could no longer see the screen because of his macular degeneration. He had a passion for learning new things right up till the end of his life. The night before his last trip to the hospital, he reprimanded me for not being patient with him while he tried to learn how to use the new phone I had gotten him. Fred William Korbus was a person who picked himself up by the bootstraps and made a successful and exciting life for himself. He took care of his family, and if you needed him, he was there. We'll all remember him, and I think we'll all miss him. Thank you. I'll take this.
All right, so Fred was my grandpa. I'm Sandy. And I just wanted to share a few memories of him on behalf of his 5 grandkids. There's Terry, Dustin, Megan, and Lauren. First of all, he was a very kind and gentle grandpa that always said hello and goodbye with an exaggerated and juicy kiss, an enthusiastic love ya. Yeah. We as well noticed that he owned many interesting gadgets and pieces of technology for his kids to explore. The very cool tap lamp that turned on, a variety of magnifying glasses that he was very proud of, the rectangles, the circles, the big ones, the small ones, an envelope opener, which we could open all of his mail with. And then later in life, his headset for the TV and the remote control chair, which my kids actually liked exploring as well when they were with him. And he made sure to spend a lot of quality time with us grandkids. Some of our best memories with him include treasure hunts, which I believe he invented. Every time we went to go visit him, he would have piles of change hiding around the house for us to find. And he would bring the treasure hunts with him when he would visit us at our own houses. Sometimes him and my grandma would come visit us in Colorado, and he would set up treasure hunts for us there. We also remember exploring his computer, which when we were little, that was a big deal that you had a computer. And he not only had one, but he had Pac-Man, Wheel of Fortune, and Flight Simulator on his computer, which he liked to show us how to play. He also lived by the airport, so we would lay out in the front yard and watch the airplanes fly over his house. And it was a very cool experience to go on walks around the neighborhood to the blue mailboxes, because none of us had those at our neighborhood. We also remember collecting fireflies with him in the front yard at night, examining his special toy airplanes and hearing stories about when he was a Navy pilot, and going places with him like the museum and swimming in pools because he loved to swim. Restaurants, all the way to the end we went out to eat. Skiing with him when he would come visit us in Colorado, and later in life just sitting around and talking over coffee. He also was a person who liked to remind you of things. He always wanted to make sure you were very safe, and he would look at you with your finger like that. When we were crossing the street when we were little, he'd say, make sure to look left, look right, and look left again. And that's something that I still do with my kids. And I remember that, crossing the alleyway on Rasher, doing that. He also thought it was very important to learn how to swim, and he would tell you how important of a skill it was to learn. And to watch your fingers when you're closing the car door, which sounds like a small thing, but every time when we were getting in the car, he'd say, fingers! He also wanted to make sure you would take care of your teeth, and he'd make you watch him rinse with vigorous amounts of Listerine. And most importantly, he told us not to forget how lucky we were to have such a great family and a nice house to live in. So we won't forget his advice or the memories he shared with us. We were lucky to have him around for as long as we did, the 97 and a half years. Even he got to get to know 4 great-grandkids, which is fantastic. And he took the time to get to know us, even though for many years, like my family, didn't live that close. So we were proud of him, and he was proud of us, and we'll make sure that our next generation carries a special place for him.